When World War II ended, many people focused on the atrocities committed by Germany and its Nazi troops. But it seems that the world overlooked a country nicknamed the Empire of the Rising Sun, whose troops committed war crimes almost as cruel as the Nazi troops. More than thousands of innocent men, women, and even children became prisoners of war who died horribly at the hands of Unit 731 of the Japanese Imperial Army, who killed under the pretext of scientific and medical progress. Unfortunately, even though the world knew about this crime by the end of the war, justice was never served. Unit 731 and the people involved continued to live freely, untouched by the law. During the war, Japan entered the main stage of the battle as the strong candidate from Asia, and it was a great achievement in the world of military politics for Emperor Hirohito that he seemed to want to do everything possible to maintain his position in the top chain of world power. In his quest to make Japan the most powerful nation, Emperor Hirohito apparently decided to ignore the rules of war and authorized the use of chemical biological weapons to conquer territory and attack his enemies. Thus, Unit 731 was formed, a secret unit dedicated to biological and chemical warfare. Research that conducted all sorts of gruesome experiments on prisoners of war to develop deadly biological weapons. Unit 731 was then sent to the Asia-Pacific region and stationed in northeastern China, which had become a bloodbath during the war because of the experiments conducted to develop weapons of mass destruction. Unit 731, which received substantial funding from the Japanese Empire, then built a research fortress and a prison for POs to conduct biological and chemical experiments. Most of the prisoners were Chinese, but there were also prisoners from allied countries that were enemies of Japan, such as the Soviet Union, Korea, Mongolia, and even the United States. Experiments were conducted on research subjects, not only to test the weapons they were developing, but also to see how far the strength of the human body could survive under extreme conditions, so that the Japanese military could understand what their soldiers would face on the battlefield. The experiments they conducted were top secret, so no one knows the full extent of what Unit 731 actually did during the war. But there are some testimonies from former workers who were in Unit 731. Based on information from the Unit731.org website, the easiest experiment in the camp seems to be the cold weather experiment. Unit 731, which wants to find out how strong humans can survive in extreme temperatures, will conduct several experiments. So during a bad winter, Unit 731 would take some human subjects out of the building and leave them outside until they froze. In an article published in the New York Times in 1995, someone testified as to how these experiments were conducted. That is, the subjects were taken outside with only the clothes on, and the guards doused them with water. And then the guards watched them until the victims suffered frostbite. Sometimes, to confirm whether the victim had frostbite, the guard would hit the frozen arm or body part with a wooden stick, and if there was a sound that seemed like a hard object, then it meant that the victim was completely frozen, and the guard would take the victim inside and hand them over to the doctor, who would use various methods to thaw the frozen body part, but sometimes the victims would be left to melt the ice themselves. In the end, the experiment yielded interesting results, and even Japanese doctors at the time agreed that frostbite could be treated by pouring hot water at temperatures above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but no higher than 122 degrees Fahrenheit. In addition to these frostbite experiments, Unit 731 also conducted surgical experiments to increase the knowledge and expertise of its surgeons. The terrible thing about this experiment is that they used living prisoners as test subjects and performed operations without giving the subjects any anesthesia or narcotics. Many of the experimental subjects were deliberately given diseases beforehand, and the doctors would open their bodies to see the effects of the disease on the human body. All the subjects who had been used as experimental surgery were then killed. One of the medical assistants who had worked at Uni 731 gave his testimony in an interview conducted by the New York Times by recounting his first experience of dissecting a human body while alive. The man said, "I cut him open from the chest to the abdomen, and he screamed loudly, and his face contorted in pain. He made unimaginable sounds. He screamed horribly, but eventually he stopped." This all happened in one day for the surgeons, but it really made an impression on me because it was my first time. The internees were also mostly subjected to experiments to test pathogens such as cholera and anthrax to see how they would affect exposed humans. Initially, this was done only in the camps, but later Unit 731 conducted field tests in nearby villages to see how effective their biological weapons were at spreading and causing deadly disease outbreaks. Some experiments were successful, which prompted Japan to try to bring their patogen to the United States by making it into a balloon bomb. It is written in some documents that Japan sent about 200 balloons to the United States, but most of them failed to destroy the United States, and the impact caused the death of only 7 unfortunate people. However, there was information that Japan planned to spread anthrax-infected fleas by sending kamikaze pilots to San Diego, but it is known that this plan failed. Weapons tests were also conducted in which test subjects were tied to poles in the middle of a field, and soldiers subjected them to gunfire or grenade throwing to see how much effect their weapons had. These weapons tests included flamethrowers and even poison gas. There was one incident where poison gas was fired at a bound prisoner, but a strong gust of wind blew in the opposite direction, toward the guard, so the poison gas changed direction and successfully sent the Japanese guards running for their lives. Unit 731 also had a pressure chamber experiment in which prisoners were forced alive into the pressure machine and then squeezed until their eyes popped out and their bodies disintegrated, causing a very painful death in addition to this pressure chamber. In the prisoner camps too, doctors and scientists deliberately spread sexually transmitted diseases not by injections, but by forcing prisoners to have sex. The victims were not only adult men and women, but also children born in the camps. Doctors and scientists often forced female prisoners to become pregnant with the intention of deliberately infecting their children with the disease so that they could see the stages of the disease and its effects on human organs at different stages. It is said that many children were born in the camp, but none of them managed to survive and live. According to some sources of testimony, there are indeed still many experiments carried out in Camp Unit 731, but most of them are kept secret. However, some other small experiments have been reported, such as experiments on people exposed to dangerous levels of radiation, injected with animal blood, injected with seawater, burned alive, and so on. Historians believe that the Japanese military was merely a conduit for these war crimes, as Unit 731's role was far more complex than expected. The testimony of historian Alan J. Vanderbroek is enough to confirm that Unit 731 played a large and important role in the creation of weapons of mass destruction in his dissertation entitled Imperial Japan's human experiment before and during World War II at the University of Central Florida. Allen wrote that Unit 731 operated in a much larger and more complex context than people thought. And in the same thesis, Allen also said that almost every major university in Japan, as well as many people in the scientific and medical community from military hospitals, civilian and military laboratories, and of course the Japanese military as a whole, were involved in Unit 731's experiments. This involvement is also due to a famous figure named Shiro Ishii.